Yeah, thanks for joining me back for the part 2 interview with the incredible Michael Holman. And yeah, basically in part 2, we're going to be talking about the downtown art scene. When Michael also met Fab Five Freddy and the Fabulous Five, holding his first kind of party in 1979, the Canal Zone. And that's the first time that Michael met Jean-Michel Basquiat. So that's going to be absolutely amazing. We're going to be talking about how they formed a group called Grey, which was brilliant. We're going to be talking about, Cool Keith from the Ultramagnetic MCs. We're going to be talking about the New York City Breakers, and we're going to be talking about loads of good stuff. So don't go anywhere. Press the subscribe button. If you haven't pressed it yet, press subscribe. And also make sure you check out part 1. Like the early interview, and I'm gonna be doing a part 3 and a part 4. Peace. Can you tell me as well what the downtown scene was like in Manhattan? That must have been amazing as well. Like loads of artists, and the vibe must have been electric.
And again, the theme park called New York. Coming from California, the way I had and with the experience I had with the band, the Tubes. It was much more natural for me when I came to New York to land in the downtown world, on the downtown scene, in the downtown art, performance, avant-garde scene. And that was my first real entry. I had a good friend, a cat named Stan Pescott, who was an English artist, a lot older than me. He went to Royal College with David Hockney and people like that. He had been in New York already for a minute. And so I met him out in California through the Tubes. So when I came to New York, he was one of my first friends. And so he was, again, an outsider too, coming from London. And he had that interesting perspective that I have now as an outsider seeing New York from that objectivity, which is really a wonderful way to see New York. And he exposed a lot of New York to me. That was really wonderful. And the downtown art scene. And I got to meet a lot of people from the downtown art scene. And as a matter of fact, Stan Pescott, this English artist, and I would hang out a lot because we had this history together in California through the Tubes. And one day I'm reading the Village Voice about this group called the Fabulous Five, this graffiti crew, who will come to this is like 78, will come to your house to do a giant graffiti mural, and you pay per the square foot, or do it at your office, your place of business. And believe me, that was rather prescient and really advanced because nobody was really thinking about that. And there was a little quote in the Village Voice by this guy named Fab Five Freddy, and he was the spokesman for the Fabulous Five. That's why he's called Fab Five Freddy. And there's a phone number. And I said, shit, let me call this guy up, right? And invited Freddie over, and Freddie would come and we'd hang out, me and Stan and Freddie, like, twisted, getting high and shit, fucking, having good ideas, coming up with crazy ideas on the weekends. And after a few of these meetings, we decided to have a party for the Fabulous Five. And we invited the whole downtown scene, art scene. These are like kids about to become fine artists, the Keith Harings and Kenny Sharfs of the world, right? And then there was this element of hip hop vis-a-vis the Fabulous Five coming together. And what's critical about that is, what's important about that is that was the very first time. Talk about this whole bringing hip hop downtown, as we've all heard about. That was the very first time that hip hop culture and the downtown art scene would rub shoulders.
So come together as one. Yeah.
Right. April 29th, 1979. And it was a party that Freddie and myself and Stan Pescott threw. It was called the Canal Zone Party. And at that party, there was this young cat, this young street artist. He wasn't really a graffiti artist. He was a street artist. He wrote poems on the street. Like, he wrote these things he called SAMO, which of the following symbols are omnipresent? A, Lee Harvey Oswald, B, Coca-Cola, C, General Mallory, D, Samo copyright, or a pin drops like a pungent odor, copyright Samo. And he shows up and he's like, yo, I want to do something too. I want to do something too, because there was a lot of Fabulous Five graffiti up, right? So we said, sure. We put a big photo paper up, and he did one of his pieces, that one I mentioned, which of the following symbols are omnipresent. Turned out to be your Samo, because everyone had seen Samo graffiti everywhere. And then later on, we found out that was Jean-Michel Basquiat. So I interview him, and after that interview, he says to me, do you want to start a band? And I'm like, yeah. I think he knew that I was in the Tubes, and he really liked the Tubes. The Tubes is a really interesting art rock band. And we did these amazing sets and stages, and he probably thought that might be interesting, to work with another black cat who's into the avant-garde and blah, blah, blah. And we started our band that night, Gray, April 29th, 1979, at that party.
How did you come up with the name Gray?
Well, first of all, we weren't called Gray right away. There was a lot of competing names. Jean, that's what we call Jean-Michel Basquiat. We called him Jean. Jean, who was really, even though he was 5 years younger than me and Nick, who were the oldest members of the group, he was really such a powerful personality and such a genius, and was very self-aware. It wasn't hard for him to take over the leadership of the band, even though there was a unsaid thing that was a democratic band, and we all made music together, and we did. But he was, if there was a debate, it was settled by him. So he had a number of ideas for names. Test Pattern, Channel 9. I had a name called Bad Fools. We were all these different names for a while. When we got rid of one guy and then added our final guy, which was Nick Taylor, and it really became the sound and the vibe that we really were looking for. We were walking, all four of us, Wayne Clifford, Nick Taylor, myself, and Jean-Michel Basquiat. We were walking 2 a.m. along the northern border of Washington Square Park, and Jean says, I got the name of the band. And we were like, what is it? And he said, Gray. And we were like, Gray. And he said it like there's no debating. I mean, we're not going to debate this. And we were like, Gray. And it just, and I know it really very much came from Gray's Anatomy, because he was very influenced by Gray's Anatomy, his old anatomy book, which he's taken references from in a lot of his paintings. But when he said it, it just, it really felt like it referred to the gray, grimy machines of the Industrial Revolution, a factory where machines that press metal, and the clanging and blanking. I mean, that's kind of how we approach music. So the idea of gray and industrial sound just made such perfect sense.
Yeah, and it just worked.
We were all like, it worked, and it was just, and it was one word. It wasn't the this or the that or something cute
just
or
gray, and that was it. Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah. And it wasn't trying hard to be wicked, or trying hard to be cool, or trying hard to be punk or anything. So neutral, and yet had said so much. And we were, a band of black and white guys, and it just, Gray. Oh yeah, 2-tone band. You put black and white together, it makes gray. And so when he said it, we were just like, yeah.
And actually, how did the Gray album do? Because that album was absolutely so ahead of its time. I mean, the album's absolutely brilliant. It combines quite a few different kind of styles of music as well.
Yeah, thank you. Well, the funny thing is that record came out much later after Gray had disbanded and came together and disbanded again a number of times. That came out in 2010, but there were songs on there from 1981, like Drum Mode, Unchanged. How did it come to? It was just like in about 2009 or 8. It was just like, man, Nick, and it was just Nick and I at that stage, and it was like we should really, put something out. We really need to. We deserve it, and the world deserves it. So that album has some old tracks. It has samples from old tracks. We remixed ourselves. There's some samples from Basquiat's voice and different things like that. But overall, it's a vision of myself and Nick Taylor. You know, it was really our vision in every respect.
It's an absolutely brilliant album, and anybody that's watching this, go and have a listen to the great album. Honestly, it's absolutely brilliant.
Well, you know, Steve, that album, Shades of, we then last year, actually, 2019, released a remix project. Do you know about that?
No.
It's the same album cover with Basquiat's fingerprints, except it's the negative. It's all black with white fingerprints on it, and because the earlier one is like white with black fingerprints. Anyway, the new project, which you can get at Rough Trade, or you go online for Ubiquity Records or Rough Trade, you can find the new Gray anthology. It's called, I think. It's got the entire early album of Shades of, just as it was, with 2 more 12-inch vinyl records of remixes of all those songs by people like, you know, Hank Shockley from Public Enemy and Todd Rundgren and King Britt from Diggable Planets and Dean Tony Parks and a lot of really cool people, you know, Gaslight Killer and Free the Robots. There's a lot of really interesting remix artists on that. Who's rapping on that? This cat named Zach does a really wicked thing with King Britt. And then, funny enough, Kool Keith does a rap on a song called I Know. And, you know, Kool Keith is just this iconic MC.
From ultramagnetic MCs.
Yes. You know what's wild, though, about Kool Keith is before he was ever a rapper, when he was just this little teenager, I had him in the New York City Breakers performance in 1984 at the Kennedy Center to honor Katherine Dunham. And it was this, you know, Reagan was the president, and it was just this huge, big government extravaganza with Frank Sinatra and all these different people. And I directed and choreographed a performance of the New York City Breakers, but with elements of Rocksteady Crew and elements of the Dynamic Rockers, particularly the Dynamic Dolls, in this performance in front of Frank Sinatra and all these major players.
Amazing.
And Kool Keith was on the stage as a locker bopper during that performance, which is just
that's incredible.
And then he turns into this great MC. It's crazy.
Yeah, from Ultramagnetics. Yeah, absolutely amazing.
If you go on YouTube and look for the New York City Breakers performance at the Kennedy Center Honors you see Kool Keith in this brown beige outfit with a beret. He has a beret on and kind of like Locker's socks going up to his knees, you know, striped socks. You'll see Kool Keith right there.
And I was going to say
Fable
and all them. Yeah, absolute legends. But
Mr. Wiggles.
I was going to say to you, Michael, you just mentioned the Dynamic Dolls, and not a lot of people know about the Dynamic Dolls, but they was part of the Dynamic Rockers. They was like the girl kind of B-girls, weren't they? That's incredible. That's incredible that you mentioned them, because you're the first person I've spoke to that has mentioned the Dynamic Dolls.
Well, yeah, I mean, the Dynamic Dolls was 4 females from the Dynamic Rockers. Unfortunately, I can only remember Kim Valente's name now after all that time. And Kim was always the leader of that offshoot. She choreographed their part of that very outspoken and very creative woman. Now everybody's like it's shocking for me, because now everyone's a grandparent at this stage. To me, they're still little kids, and but you know, half of them are grandparents by now. But yeah, the Dynamic Dolls, the Dynamic Rockers, and you know, there's some elements of that are really close to me, like Kid Freeze, who was the leader of the Dynamic Rockers. You know, my first film I ever made, which which was really the first hip hop film ever made, was my short film. Came out a year before Wild Style, was Catch a Beat. And Catch a Beat, it's not a narrative, it's not a story, it's not 2 hours long, it's just 5 minutes long. But it has credits and it has a little, story and all that. And it's the first hip hop film ever made. But the centerpiece of that film is the battle at Lincoln Center between dynamic rockers and rocksteady crew. And it's historic. I mean, I have a lot of firsts in hip hop, funny enough. I have a lot of them, which people don't know about. But like, I was the first person to use the term hip hop in a publication. I interviewed Africa Bambaataa for an article in the East Village Eye. East Village Eye was a small downtown art newspaper published by Leonard Abrams. And he asked me to do a whole series of stories. It wasn't just that interview with Bambaataa. I did a thing on the Lincoln Center battle. I did a thing on breaking. I did a thing on fashion, on hip hop fashion. And in that interview with Bambaataa, we're talking about hip hop and all of its, how to define it. And it was the first time it had been defined in print. I mean, first time the word hip hop had been used, and it came out January 1982. Now, there were flyers done specifically by our friend Phase 2, who used the term hip hop before that, a year or so before that, maybe in 79 or 80, used the term hip hop. But you have to remember the term so in terms of, in a printed thing handed out, the flyers came first. But in a publication, in an official newspaper publication, I'm that writer who used it first. But what's interesting is, so what were you guys calling it before January 82? It had a lot of names. It wasn't any one name. It was like Uptown Culture. There was a minute where it was called Boing Yoing. Why? Because James Brown's influence in hip hop is larger than any other singular force. And his song, Soul Power Part 1 has that boing yoing 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 sound effect, and it was like a dancer's, reference. It's like, yo, let's do the boing yoing yoing, or let's go to that boing yoing yoing party, And so it was called boing yoing yoing. Hip hop, it was called executive style. I know that sounds weird, but discos, it was a big deal to go to disco parties and clubs like Bonds or whatever, or even uptown clubs like Stardust Ballroom, wearing suits and ties. That was a big deal during the disco days. And so it was this executive, we're like kind of like copying this executive style, whether we're executives or not. Which that same thing plays out in the 80s in ski gear. Ski gear was like a big deal, but none of those kids were skiing.
No, so true, so true.
That aesthetic was a big deal. So it was the same thing with this executive style. People got sharp in the 70s. There was there were kids wearing the thrift shop look, but there was kids wearing this kind of brand new designer, off-the-shelf designer look. And so there was this executive thing. It was called disco. It was called a lot of things. But the main thing that I think you don't hear a lot of people say, and again, I had this luxury of being an outsider, someone who came from somewhere else, who could see New York. And not only did I come from somewhere else, like California, which is in itself a very advanced place culturally in a lot of ways, like skateboarding, locking, popping, surfing. California has its own health food, hippies, on and on. We know about California. It has its own juice. So coming from outside and coming from California, a strong cultural place, I could see things that maybe a native New Yorker couldn't see because they're just too close to see it. You can't see the forest from the trees.
So you was kind of looking from the outside in.
Yeah, I was looking from the outside, seeing things that maybe people in the inside may not see because they just didn't have that distance. One thing that I understood was this, and this is later on in the 90s and even the 2000s as I'm looking back and analyzing this, was that the engine that drove hip hop culture singularly were middle school kids, junior high kids from 12 to 16, 17. Why? Because at the height of disco in the mid 70s, urban culture, urban life, I'm reluctant and careful to not paint young kids, young Black and Puerto Rican kids, with the brush that says you're a grown up and you're as a weapon against us. A lot of people will see a 12-year-old Black kid and see an adult and see him as dangerous. So I'm careful to say what I'm gonna say. What I'm gonna say is this: young kids from the streets, from a city like New York, 10, 12, 14 years old, are far more advanced culturally, streetwise, hip-wise, language-wise, than their counterparts in the suburbs. It just stands to reason. They're seeped in a city that's seeped in culture itself, New York. So they're hipper than their counterparts anywhere else. They're faster, they're smarter, they're cooler. But because they're so young, legally, and because they don't have the money, because they don't have a job and all that stuff, they're not allowed to go to the clubs downtown, like the Blue Angel, and the Hollywood, and the Les Jardins, and David's Loft. Every once in a while, you'd have somebody like, I would tell, I heard stories from people like Jazzy J, who said, yeah, man, because I was so-and-so's a DJ assistant carrying the records, and I was only 13 or 14, I got into the Sanctuary, or I got into this club or that club because I was carrying the records and I was too young, but nobody cared. And I would hear these stories from some of these quote-unquote middle school kids who got to see some of these clubs downtown and how blown away they were. And that did happen. But for the most part, Steve, 99% of the time, that generation is not allowed to go downtown, doesn't have the money to go downtown, isn't old enough to be dating, et cetera, et cetera. So now, and the big but, is that they're straight up ready to party and are a great party crowd. They can do all the dances, they know all the songs, so they're perfectly capable of partying down. So they're a great audience for a party. So smart entrepreneurial types like Grandmaster Flash and Bambaataa and Herc are throwing parties in the park the same way years before they did downtown in Manhattan at Bethesda Fountain in the middle of the day on a Sunday. We kind of called those tea parties, by the way. TEA, like drinking tea. I don't know where it came from. But anyway, so throwing parties in the park for this locked in audience, this captured audience, meaning these middle school kids, was a no-brainer. They'll come and show up and pay $1 to get in and be part of it if there's a fee, or if there's no fee. It's easy enough to walk into the park. They'll show up and make your party hot and fabulous and blah, blah, blah. And you set up your sound systems, and you got these wild giant sound systems inspired by a lot of the Caribbean first generation, second generation cats that have moved to New York. You got your turntables, because the DJs know what's going on in the clubs downtown. They're sort of emulating that. You've got this built-in captured audience, middle school kids. And so when they threw those uptown jams, those park jams in the mid and later 70s, they were disco, understand this, man. They were disco parties straight up. They were the disco parties that you as a middle school kid could not attend for myriad reasons, age and money being the two most important, downtown in Manhattan, where disco was like the coolest fucking thing. Of course you want to go, but you can't go because you're too young. So now we throw these parties in the park, and those now here's where things start to change, and this is where disco is starting to leave. The baton is being passed from disco to hip hop. Those DJs like Bambaataa and Grandmaster Flash and Herc, for whatever reason, either because they were inherited from their parents or because they were inclined this way, big crate diggers, big record collectors, had big record collections, knew the songs, funk songs, blah, blah. So unlike a DJ working downtown at the Blue Angel who has to play all the happening disco records on the radio, top 20 disco records on the radio all night, which is all anybody wants to hear, our uptown brothers in the Bronx who are throwing their own parties, it's their party, they do what the fuck they want. Yes, they're playing the disco hits that everybody's hearing on the radio, but they're adding in stuff that they want to add in. They're adding in James Brown, of course, but then they're adding in a lot of other novelty records like maybe The Mexican by Babe Ruth, some obscure English band called Babe Ruth. They're adding in Diodato. They're adding in Just Begun by
Jimmy Castor.
Jimmy Castor Bunch. They're adding in all kinds of stuff. They're throwing in a few Jamaican tracks too here and there. But the point is Bambaataa is saying to himself, I'm throwing this party. I'm assuming he gets I know he did because I know I went to a lot of his parties. Let's assume that he got permission from the Bronx River Community Center, which is right in the center of all the Bronx River projects or council flats. He gets permission from them to throw a party every other Friday. Maybe they give him a little budget. They plugs the lights into the sound, plugs the power into the light post, whatever. But the playlist is his. He's gonna, and because of Bambaataa's particular genius, and because he was called the king of records, not only is he throwing in all these novelty records, these obscure funk and soul and novelty records that have great beats, he's throwing in TV theme songs like from I Dream of Jeannie, or dun 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 dun. Yeah, he's playing this to the kids. Not only that, he's playing the Monkees' Mary Mary. What is his criteria? Why is he playing these records? His criteria is if it has a funky beat and you can dance to it, no matter how bizarre or silly or nutty it might sound, I'm going to play it. I won't play the whole night with that, but I might drop that in every once in a while. And the night that I brought Malcolm McLaren up to the Bronx River and he was playing these records, it was amazing. It was such, now talk about a culture, what must have been a culture shock for Malcolm McLaren. I don't know if you want me to go into that story.
So yeah, don't go anywhere. I'm going to be doing a part 3. So yeah, go and check out part 3, and we're going to be talking about when, Michael first met Malcolm McLaren in New York, and basically taking Malcolm to Bronx River, to the South Bronx, to meet Bam and loads of other, people there. So yeah, check it out. It's going to be absolutely brilliant. See a subscribe button. If you haven't pressed it yet, press subscribe. And also make sure you check out part 1, like the early interview. And I'm going to be doing a part 4. Peace.